The moment Gene Holbrook shook his own son's hand across that conference table, with my $38,000 sitting right there on the line, I understood exactly what kind of company I had been working for. My name is Walt Deering. I'm 54 years old, senior project manager at Hartwell Infrastructure Group, 6 years. And that afternoon, I sat completely still while Gene stood at the front of the room explaining, with a straight face, why Cody Holbrook deserved exceptional recognition for his innovative contributions to the team. Cody Holbrook. Same last name as Gene Holbrook, regional director. The man's own son. I didn't say anything, I just watched. The bonus wasn't a gift or a surprise. It was written into our performance agreement. Anyone who exceeded their annual targets by more than 25% received it automatically. I had exceeded mine by 55%. 6 years of staying late, taking calls on weekends, flying out to job sites when nobody else wanted to deal with a difficult client at 7 in the morning. I had brought in 4 new infrastructure contracts that quarter alone. The $38,000 was supposed to be mine. My son Scott's final year of college tuition was due in 2 months. Brenda and I had a home repair loan we were trying to close out. We had been counting on that money. Not planning a vacation with it, actually counting on it to cover real things. After the meeting ended, Cody found me near the elevator. He looked genuinely uncomfortable, the kind of uncomfortable you can't fake. "Mr. Deering, I want you to know I didn't ask for this," he said. "I don't even fully understand why they chose me." I looked at him and believed every word. He was a decent kid, a little green, but not dishonest. He had no idea what his father had done or why. He was just the guy who happened to share a last name with the man holding the pen. "Congratulations, Cody," I told him. "Keep working hard." That evening, I told Brenda what happened. She went quiet for a moment, then said what any reasonable person would say. "Walt, that's not right. Can't you go to HR?" "It's more complicated than that," I said. I was already thinking, because 2 weeks earlier, I had overheard Gene on a personal call in the hallway. He was relaxed, laughing, talking about Uncle Bill and a cookout back in Harwick, Pennsylvania. Population around 6,000. I knew that name because Cody had mentioned growing up there during his first week, the way people from small towns mention it, like you might actually know the place. I had filed that detail away without thinking much of it. After the bonus announcement, I pulled it back out. I started paying closer attention. Gene and Cody had a familiarity that went beyond a manager and an intern. Inside references to local spots. Shared reactions when certain names came up in passing. When I asked Cody casually about his family back home, he mentioned his dad had grown up in Harwick, that the Holbrook family had been part of the local alumni association there for years. That was enough. The bonus had nothing to do with performance metrics or fresh thinking. Gene had dressed up a family favor in corporate language and handed it across a conference table like it was a legitimate business decision. 6 years of my work redirected to his kid because they shared a hometown and a history that had nothing to do with this company or anything I had spent 6 years building here. Here's the thing about me. I don't make scenes. I don't send angry emails at midnight. I've been around long enough to know that the loudest response is almost never the most effective one. I've watched guys blow up their careers over situations they could have handled quietly and walked away from clean. That was never going to be me, so I got quiet. And I got to work. The first thing I did was start teaching Cody everything I knew, and I did it fast, not as a favor to Gene, as a setup. I walked Cody through our most advanced project audit frameworks, the kind of structured risk mapping that takes years of real field experience to apply under pressure. I showed him client escalation protocol, stakeholder dependency analysis, the full technical vocabulary of infrastructure delivery at the enterprise level. He absorbed it eagerly. I'll give him that. Cody was smart, genuinely curious, and he asked the right questions. Under different circumstances, in a different timeline where he had come up the right way, he could have become a solid PM, but he hadn't come up the right way. He had been handed a title and a spotlight 9 weeks in, and nobody had stopped to ask whether the foundation was there. I knew it wasn't. And I knew exactly what would happen when the weight came down on it. After 2 weeks of intensive sessions, I recommended Cody for the internal operations audit project, the biggest one on our calendar that quarter. The kind of assignment that required a minimum of 5 years of hands-on project experience to execute without making serious errors in front of senior stakeholders. Gene approved it on the spot. He was proud, genuinely pleased to see his son getting real visibility. He never once stopped to ask whether Cody was actually ready for what he was walking into. That was Gene's second mistake. His first was thinking I would just absorb the loss and move on. The second thing I did was stop being available. For 6 years, I had been the person you called when something broke on a Friday at 6 p.m. I had answered weekend emails, rerouted project crises before they became client crises, absorbed extra work during staff shortages without a word of complaint. I had covered for colleagues during vacations, stepped in on projects that weren't mine when deadlines slipped, and taken calls from frantic clients while sitting in restaurants with my family. Management had stopped seeing any of that as effort a long time ago. They saw it as a given. Walt will handle it. Walt always handles it. It had become invisible, the way a load-bearing wall is invisible until someone decides to knock it down. I decided to find out what happened when Walt stopped handling it. I started leaving at 5:30, not with an announcement, not with a speech about work-life balance. Just quietly, consistently. Every day when weekend calls came in, I responded Monday morning with a short note about being unreachable. When colleagues asked me to absorb overflow work, I told them my current project load was already full and I couldn't take on anything additional right now. I was polite about it every single time, professional, no edge in my voice, no attitude. I just stopped doing anything beyond what my job description actually required. The effects showed up faster than I expected. A site delivery issue that I would have caught and resolved in 2 hours on a Saturday morning festered over an entire weekend and became a formal client complaint by Tuesday. Client calls that I normally intercepted went to voicemail and sat there. Project timelines that had been built without anyone realizing it around my personal availability started slipping by days and then by weeks. The whole operation had been running as smoothly as it had because I was quietly holding pieces together that nobody had ever bothered to document or assign to anyone officially. Now those pieces were just sitting on the floor. Gene started looking worried around the third week. He came to find me with that careful tone managers use when they need something but don't want to sound like they're asking. Walt, I know you've been keeping better hours lately, which is good, but we have a few situations developing that could really use your experience. I listened to his full list. Every item on it was something I would have handled automatically 6 months ago, without being asked, without being thanked, without it ever showing up anywhere that counted. Those do sound challenging, I said. I'm confident the team will work through them. Cody has been stepping up a lot lately. Gene's expression tightened. These particular situations need someone with your level of experience, Walt. I understand the concern. Unfortunately, my current workload is already committed for the next few weeks. You might want to consider bringing in external consultants for the additional capacity. External consultants would cost Hartwell roughly 3 times my hourly rate for the same work. Gene knew that number as well as I did. He walked away without a solution and without a plan. I went back to my desk and kept working. What Gene didn't know was that I had been doing something else in the background for the past 3 weeks. Every lunch break, every quiet hour at the end of the day, I had been writing things down. Every operational gap I had been silently covering for years. Every process that lived only in my head because no one had ever asked me to formalize it. Client preferences that weren't in any system. Risk factors I had been tracking informally on projects that had no official risk register. Handoff procedures that existed only because I had invented them and kept following them out of habit. I turned it all into a 14-page internal report and submitted it to HR the week before my last day. I want to be clear about why I did that. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't a parting shot. It was the right thing to do professionally, and I had been meaning to document half of it for years anyway. But I also knew that putting it on record, officially, would make it impossible for anyone to pretend later that my role had been routine or replaceable. The paper trail would say exactly what had been walking out the door. Now, about those 2 enterprise clients. There were 2 accounts I had managed personally from the beginning. Castleton Regional and Briar Summit Development. I had been their primary contact at Hartwell for over 4 years. I knew their project leads by name. I knew their internal politics. I knew which calls to take and which concerns to address before they became problems. Those relationships were mine, built over time, and everyone in the building knew it. When I told both contacts professionally that I would be transitioning to a new opportunity, I didn't ask them to follow, I didn't pitch them on anything. I gave them enough notice to plan accordingly and let them make their own decisions. They both called Gene the same week to let him know they intended to continue working with me at my new firm. That was not something I engineered. That was just what happens when you spend 4 years being the person who actually shows up for clients and then you leave. Paula Renwick from Sentinel Group had been calling me for months. Sentinel was Hartwell's most direct competitor in regional infrastructure consulting, and Paula had been patient about it, following up every few weeks without pressure. I had always declined politely because I valued stability, and I didn't love the idea of moving at my age. This time, I called her back. The offer came together quickly. 45% salary increase, $15,000 signing bonus, equity participation with real long-term upside, and the kind of large-scale technical work I had been doing for years but never quite getting credit for. I told her I needed the weekend. I already knew what I was going to say. Monday morning I came in with my resignation letter in my jacket pocket and a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Gene intercepted me before I reached my desk. He had already been on calls that morning. His face told me everything before he opened his mouth. "Walt," he said, "I need to talk to you." I handed him the envelope. He stared at it for a moment, like he wasn't sure what it was. Then he opened it right there in the hallway, standing under the fluorescent lights with people walking past us on both sides. "You're giving 2 weeks' notice," he said. "During audit quarter. The notice period is what the contract requires. Is there any flexibility on your start date with the new company?" "No, they have a client implementation beginning in 3 weeks that needs me on it from day one." He stood there doing the math out loud without saying the numbers. Replacing my role at my current salary would take months, assuming they could find the right person at all. The client situation with Castleton and Briar Summit needed someone who understood both the technical requirements and the relationships involved, and the audit project Cody had been assigned was not going well, which Gene already knew and hadn't fully admitted to himself yet. "Walt, I want to be straight with you," he said, lowering his voice. "The bonus decision, I think there was an error in how that was handled. I'd like to revisit that." I looked at him steadily. "I appreciate that, but my decision isn't about the bonus." And that was true. By that point, it genuinely wasn't about the money anymore. The $38,000 had been the signal, not the problem. The problem was 6 years of carrying weight that nobody saw, in a place where the man at the top moved money around based on who his son was. "You can't fix that with a check." Gene tried once more. "What would it take to keep you here?" Counter offer, different role, a formal commitment to revised recognition processes. "Whatever you need, Walt. I want to have that conversation. I think this transition is the right move for everyone," I said. "You'll have the chance to restructure the team in a way that actually works long-term. Cody will have room to develop at a pace that's right for him. And I'll be doing the kind of work that fits where I am in my career." He asked where I was going. When I told him Sentinel Group, something shifted in his expression. Not quite respect. More like the moment a person realizes they've been miscalculating something for a long time. "They're our biggest competitor in this region," he said quietly.
That's part of why the opportunity made sense. What Gene didn't fully grasp yet was that Sentinel had been recruiting me specifically because they had been losing potential contracts to Hartwell in the enterprise space.
Several clients in our pipeline had chosen Hartwell over Sentinel specifically because of my reputation in the industry and the relationships I had built over the years. That wasn't arrogance. That was just what Paula had told me plainly when she made the offer. Now, those relationships would move with me, not because I was taking them, but because that's what relationships do. That afternoon, I sent a short email to the full company, 4 sentences, thanking the team for 6 years of good work together, wishing everyone well going forward, and letting them know my last day would be 2 weeks out. No bitterness, no coded language, no hint of the whole story underneath it. The entire office knew by end of day that I was leaving by choice. That mattered more than most people realize. There's a difference between being pushed out and walking out, and everyone in a company can feel which one it is. The following 2 weeks were something to observe. Cody was running into the gap between knowing something and being able to use it when the pressure was real. The audit project required judgment calls that could only come from years of actual field experience, the kind of institutional instinct you can't download from a training session or a week of intensive coaching. He could articulate the frameworks I had taught him. He could not adapt them in real time when a senior stakeholder challenged his numbers in a room full of people. I watched this without intervening. When Cody came to find me looking stressed and uncertain, I offered encouragement and asked him questions that helped him think through the problem. When he asked for specific answers, I reminded him that learning to work through difficult problems without a safety net was the most important thing a project manager could develop. "You're capable of figuring this out," I told him, and I meant it. "I've seen how you work. You'll get there." What I didn't do was solve it for him. Gene had to step in personally on the audit project during the second week. He walked into a client review session and spent 90 minutes answering questions that Cody should have been able to handle. The exceptional young talent framing got very quiet after that meeting. The senior leadership that Gene had been so eager to impress with his intern's fresh perspective got a different kind of impression instead. At the same time, 3 other senior project managers on the team had quietly scheduled one-on-one meetings with Gene. My departure had made them do math they had been avoiding. They had been carrying above-average workloads on below-market salaries, and watching me leave on my own terms had made them ask why they were still accepting the same deal. Gene found himself in the middle of a retention problem he hadn't seen coming, in addition to everything else. On my second to last day, Cody came to find me at the end of the afternoon. "Mr. Deering," he said, "can I ask you something honestly? Go ahead. Did you know this would happen when you recommended me for the audit project?" I thought about it before answering. "I knew you were smart enough to learn those frameworks," I told him. "I also knew the only way you'd find your real limits was to run into them under actual pressure. That's not something I could teach you in a conference room." He nodded slowly, looking at the floor for a moment. "It wasn't fair to me either, you know. Being put in that position, I didn't know what I didn't know, and nobody around me was going to tell me." That surprised me. It was an honest thing to say, and it took some courage to say it directly. "You're right," I said. "It wasn't fair to you. I'm going to ask my father to scale back my responsibilities. I should be in a junior PM track with real mentorship, not running audits I'm not ready for." I felt something I hadn't expected, not satisfaction exactly, more like respect. The kid had looked at the situation clearly and called it for what it was, even knowing that meant admitting in front of himself that he wasn't where his father had positioned him to be. "That's the right call," I told him. "The fundamentals you've built in these past few weeks are real. They don't go away. Build on them before you take on anything at this scale again." He shook my hand before he walked out. That was the last real conversation I had at Hartwell. On my final Friday, the team put together a small farewell. Gene stood up and said something about how I had been the backbone of the department for 6 years. He talked about my professionalism, my expertise, the way I had mentored people without being asked. He meant every word. I could hear it. That was almost the hardest part of the whole thing, knowing he saw it clearly now at the exact moment when it no longer changed anything. I said thank you. I shook hands around the room. I walked out into the parking lot, put my bag in the car, and sat there for about a minute before I started the engine. 6 years. And all it took was one afternoon in a conference room for me to finally understand what those 6 years had actually been worth to that place, and what that place had actually been worth to me. That night, Scott called. He had heard the news from Brenda. "So you really did it," he said. "Did what?" "Left without blowing anything up." I laughed. It was the first time I had laughed in about 3 weeks. "What good would blowing anything up have done?" I said. He was quiet for a second. "I think I would have been furious, Dad. I don't know if I could have kept it together the way you did." "I was furious," I said. "I just didn't let the fury make the decisions." He thought about that. "Is it worth it? The new job, starting over at your age?" "I'm not starting over," I said. "I'm taking everything I built and moving it somewhere it actually counts." 3 months into Sentinel, I got an email from Cody. He had been reassigned to a structured junior PM track with a proper mentor assigned to him. He was doing well, genuinely well. The kind of progress that comes from being in the right lane instead of being pushed into the fast lane before you can see over the dashboard. He had developed a client onboarding checklist that his team had adopted across 3 active projects. The email was short. He wrote that he knew the past few weeks at Hartwell had been complicated, that he understood now the position I had been put in and the position he had been put in, and that he was grateful I had pushed him toward his limits instead of just letting him pretend he didn't have any. "I learned more about what I didn't know in those 4 weeks than I would have in a year of easy assignments," he wrote. "I hope our paths cross again someday." I wrote back 2 lines. Told him I was glad he was finding his footing, and that the fundamentals he had built were the real thing. He would be fine. 6 months after my last day, Gene reached out through LinkedIn. Hartwell had lost both Castleton Regional and Briar Summit to Sentinel in Q3. His department had been through a difficult restructuring. He said he had learned things from the situation that he wished he had understood earlier, and he asked if I would be open to a conversation about consulting on a specific technical project where our experience might complement each other. I told him I would think about it. I meant that honestly. There was no bitterness left in it by then. The $38,000 bonus that started all of this turned out to be the least expensive lesson Hartwell ever paid for losing a person who knew what he was doing. Gene's decision cost his company far more than that number in lost contracts, restructuring time, and the slow exit of senior staff who had finally started asking the right questions about their own situations. I don't carry anger about any of it. I made a decision, I executed it cleanly, and I moved forward into work that was worth my time. The way I see it, you can spend your energy trying to prove your value to people who have already decided what they think of you. Or you can walk out. Go somewhere the work actually means something, and let the room figure out on its own what it lost. I chose the door, and I have not looked back once. If any part of this story landed for you, it's probably because you've been in that room too. Maybe not the exact same conference table. Maybe not the exact same number on the line, but that same moment of sitting still and realizing the game had been rigged in a way you hadn't fully seen until right then. Most men in that position absorb it. They tell themselves it's not worth the fight, or that things will even out eventually, or that making noise will only make things worse. And they keep carrying the weight because that's what they've always done. Here's what I want you to take from Walt's story. Knowing your value isn't arrogance. It's information. And once you have that information clearly, the only real question is what you're willing to do with it. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from, and if this hit close to home, share it with someone who needs to hear it, because sometimes the most important thing a man can do is stop holding up a ceiling that was never meant to protect him.